Today's project is to put the AC back into working order on this 1987, I think it is, 911 Carrera. So a lot of people have taken air conditioning off of these cars when they break over the years. And one of the big problems is the original hoses that were used on these cars were not barrier hoses. So they were designed somewhat to have leakage, and R12 would tend to leak out. But back in the 80s and the 90s, it wasn't a big deal. If you were like me and worked in a shop in the late 80s, early 90s, then you just had a big old tub of Freon in the corner, and every time a car came in, you just top it off. It wasn't a big deal. Now with EPA laws and environmentals, and you got to recover all of this stuff, these hoses really don't work anymore. So what we're going to do today is this owner has brought his car in. He's brought his old rear condenser, which sits right here. We got that on the bench. We're going to straighten the fins and flush it. He's brought his compressor in. We're going to clean it out and just re-oil it, put it back on the car. These gave us very little trouble in these applications. And then we're going to change all of our AC hoses and get this back up and running on our R134a refrigerant. So this is our old rear condenser, and it's got a couple of little nerfs. So I'm just taking my little comb here, and we'll comb through and get these as best as we possibly can, just because we want to make sure that we get as much cooling as we can out of our condenser. One of the differences between R134 and R12, and this was originally an R12 car, is R134 generates higher pressures on the high side, which results in higher heats. So we want to make sure that our condenser can get rid of that heat as best as it possibly can. So I'm just going to comb these. Doesn't have to be perfect. Let's get them a little cleaner than they were. And then we'll get all this fitted back onto the car after I flushed it. Okay, so it looks pretty good on that side. Let's take a look at the other side. The other side's got some big hits in it, which I'm not sure I'll be able to do much with. Right here. We'll see if we can clean them up as best as I can, but not going to get those with a comb by itself. Also helps because it'll drag out any debris that's in the surface of these fins as well. A little bit better. It's already got an R134 kit on it.
How do you know?
These right here. I'm going to put a new one on anyway, new valves. Feels good. Generating pressure. Generates suction. Feels nice and smooth. Yeah, just our mounting hardware, old piece of foam, tab, bolts. Yep, it's everything we need. It's all there. Sure that I get my, because here's my AC line here and here. I need to make sure that my lift points are not obscuring it. And on the same part, I've got to be in the strong part of the floor pan so I don't mess them up. So we're underneath the car right now. When you rack these and you're doing AC work, you got to pay attention to our AC line. So it's a little more somewhat precarious the way it's mounted, but still safe. One of the things you can see, this is one of our main high pressure lines. This runs to the front condenser. You can see this is split here. You can also, the condition of the hoses. I mean, these things are 35 something years old, so well and truly done. But we've got two sets of lines. We have this line that runs all the way down on the left side of the vehicle. Also on the right side of the vehicle, we have our suction line. This runs all the way down and up in here, which goes up to our front evaporator. We also have on these cars a front condenser assembly. Now, this is protected by this Nerf bar in the front. It's designed to try and protect this condenser. It doesn't always happen. This one doesn't look too bad, hasn't had any major hits, but we need to pull this wheel off. We'll be, I don't know, sometimes I pull the washer bottle out, sometimes I don't. It just depends on how the job goes, because I've got these two lines here that snake up and over behind the washer bottle. And that's pretty much about it. We'll get the tray off. We need to get into the evaporator box area. And we also need to test the condenser motor that runs on top of this front condenser. It's a common failure point for those motors to seize up. And when that front condenser fan is not working, and this one is already, I've already had a quick look at it. It's not even installed correctly. It's missing all the screws. But when they don't work, the AC system doesn't work effectively either. So right here, what I had to do is I had to take off one of the clamps already. So here's the clamp and the screw. Because where this runs, it usually runs right underneath where this pad is right now. So just so I could work on the car, I've loosened it and pulled it out. And you can see here where it runs along the rest of the vehicle. But also up here, we have our receiver dryer. And you can see our other lines that run up and over to the condenser that run up behind that washer bottle. In here, this is our receiver dryer, which is kind of like the filter for the air conditioning system. And it's also where we look at our level. So I need to get all of that out. Looks like it's already got an aftermarket one in there at some point. The problem with working on these cars is if you don't change all the lines and you just try and service them as old as they are, all that happens is they just keep losing all of their gas. It's one line off. You always got to make sure you double wrench these, because otherwise you can just twist it and break the fitting. There's that other line off. And I'll snake those. I've just dropped my washer bottle down. I don't want to pull the whole front valance off on this car. No reason to. So I can snake these back up through and feed the new ones down without any issues. But for right now, I'm just going to let them sit there. They're disconnected and work my way down the car. This hose has been replaced before. So this is the front condenser blower motor. This one was missing all of its screws and was not attached. spins. Let's see if it actually works. Yep, that works. Great. Yep, so all we need to do is we'll kind of clean this up a little bit. Get some foam down here on the mount. Put in some new screws. Make sure everything's clear here because this needs to blow through that front condenser to help keep it cool. So that's a bonus. So here's my expansion valve and my two hoses coming up from underneath the car that we've already disconnected. So I'm just going to double wrench these and unscrew these one at a time and feed them out through the bottom. So that's what it looks like when it's all out. And this is what I look like, covered in stuff. So now we got to flush our condensers and start repiping the whole car, putting it all back together. So when you're installing these lines, you'll notice that I've started kind of routing them because I'm tight up on the evaporator, but I'm going to leave kind of the center open because if I start installing everything and I have to give it a slight twist, a lot of the times because these lines are aftermarket now, there's no real factory hose that you can go buy from Porsche. And even if you could, the chances of it being a barrier line is pretty slim. So one of the issues that I often find is the connections aren't always crimped 100%. I mean, they're pretty close, but they're not always 100%. So if I leave the centers open, it gives me some room to give it maybe a little bit of torsional twist in the line. The other thing you have to remember is the old lines had taken a set to all of this. They'd been here for 30-something years, except for one line that had been changed. So these are going to have to be worked and kind of pushed in. So I'm secured at my evaporator, so I've plugged all of this, but I'm not going to put anything else here until I get this line. It's going to run up and into my receiver dryer. I won't tie this line down till it's all connected. So there's one of the old O-rings. You got to make sure all the O-rings are out of your parts before you go and jam a new one in, and you can see how much of a set this has taken. It's also really rock hard. You can't see that on the video, but see, it just snapped really easily. Okay, so I'm just going to flush some air through this condenser. I've got a shop towel there to catch any oil that's going to come out. So that was it, just a little bit of oil. Now, if this had had a compressor failure, I do have an AC flush fluid that I would run through to flush out any contaminants. This one, I just want to make sure everything's flowing, which it is. There we go. So I've got everything fitted in. I've got a new receiver dryer in. You got to make sure that this window is turned enough so that you can see it, because inside here is going to be a little float valve, and that little bowl in there is how you tell you've got enough refrigerant in once that floats up. And then I've got all our clamps back on, all our washer bottles hooked back up. Ended up having to take out our expansion tank. That's for our gas tank ventilation system, just because I needed more room to be able to feed the hoses back down correctly. But that's what it should look like under there, and we're ready to move on with routing the rest of the cables. This is the clamp that came off of here. So we've got our rear condenser back in. Really simple installation. We didn't show it. Just went ahead and did it. It's just 2 screws, 1 on each hinge, and then it folds up, and this little metal plate right here will hold it. AC pipes are all on. I've got my compressor sitting in there. AC pipes are attached here. I've just got the compressor still loose. To tension the belt, I'm going to be tightening this tension bolt right here. So I've just backed the nut off, and we're just going to set that tension and then tighten these sliders down. Okay, once you get it tensioned, tighten the lock nut, and then I've just got to grab my ratchet and tighten the hold down bolts. So we're up to the point now where it's about time to put everything under a vacuum. So I've just taken my charging point covers off. This is the high side, or the discharge, and this one down here is going to be the low side. So I'll get my AC machine out and we'll get the vacuum pump on it, put the system under a vacuum and make sure it holds vacuum pressure. So I pulled the system down for 30 minutes, put it under a decent vacuum. We're limited here due to altitude as to how much of a vacuum we can pull, but the system is not holding a vacuum. So I got a leak somewhere. So I'm going to put a pound of gas in it and let it run and see if I can't find, check all the condensers, evaporator, and compressor and see if anything's obviously leaking. Okay, so I put a pound of gas in it, and I've been over the front condenser and evaporator. But as soon as I come in on the back of the compressor, getting a good solid leak coming out of the compressor shaft. Not so much on the front side, but definitely in the back. But around all of the fittings, no issues. Went over all of the cores and the pipes in the front and the back. And I've got my leak detector set to small leaks. Nothing over the evaporator or over the condenser, but as soon as I come back in, good solid leak coming out of the compressor. So I have my new compressor that came in to replace the old one that was leaking, and once I pulled it off, you could actually is some signs of failure there where it's got some mechanical splooge coming out of it that's all black. But here's a new compressor. We just got to transfer over the two fittings, and we'll get it back onto the car and get it under a vacuum again. So we're about to charge up our AC system. I'm going to put about 30 ounces of R134 in it. These cars were originally decided to run on R12, and when you charge them with R134, you want to undercharge them a little bit, but I'll kind of see where my final charge ends up. One of the most important things that you need to do is close the rear condenser lid, because if the lid is up when you're charging it, it's not going to pull any air over it, and it's going to send my high side pressures really high. So I'm going to turn the air on and charge it up.
From the gauges.
Well, right now my high side's too high because it's charging, so I'm closing off putting gas into it. I'm actually not going to put any more in there.
It was already getting cold, I felt.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
And I can't decide to smell.
There we go, that high side's starting to stabilize.
What do you want to see?
Usually I want to see around 200, 220. And then on the low side, it's sitting right at 30. Normally with R12, it'll sit around 20. Okay, so our vent temp is heading down. We're sitting right at about 46 degrees right now and still slowly dropping down. I think if I drove it, it would actually drop down a little bit lower. I got to hold the temp gauge in and my hand's frozen. But driving, getting a little bit more airflow over those condensers will bring that down a little bit more, but I'm pretty happy with that. So we're sitting right around 40 degrees. And yes, it is quite chilly in the car. Exactly what we're looking for.